Hi, readers. It's Admin KJ, aka Lydia Dietz today because it is Halloween. I tried adding a little bit of Halloween to my outfit today, but my hat was a little too big for the screen, but I do have my earrings. I truly can't believe it's already Halloween, but I'm super excited. Just as a warning, I do have some trick-or-treaters that might be showing up on the door. So if you hear anything, it's probably people just asking for candy. So it's one of my favorite holidays. I love covering pumpkins, watching my go-to movies, snacking on any kind of like fall themed, foods. So if you have any autumn themed recipes, especially anything involving apples, please drop those in the comments section. Always looking for new recipes to try. And today I am thrilled to be hosting our Halloween chat with co-authors of A Haunted History of Invisible Women, Leanna, Renee, Hieber, and Andrea James. Like Admin LJ, I am a bit of a scaredy cat, but I do love history and I do love ghost stories too. And I love looking at moments in time through a unique lens, which is exactly what I love most about A Haunted History of Invisible Women. We've heard so many of these ghost stories or legends, but why do they resonate with us and why have these tales endured over time? So readers, if you love anything to do with the paranormal world, you love history, and you're interested in a feminist take on American ghost stories, I definitely recommend this. And then as housekeeping, we will be doing a flash giveaway today in the chat. So anyone who writes in a question will be entered to win. So get those questions ready. And now please help me welcome Leanna and Andrea. On. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, friends.
Oh, everyone's fine. Yeah. Well, thank you guys for joining me today on Halloween.
It's the best day of the year.
It is.
I agree. It's truly one of my favorites. You can kind of see I have my spooky floating candles that will be turned on later this evening. So I'm ready.
I love it.
So I gave a quick overview, just a little brief snippet about your book. Could you guys please kind of dive into it a little bit more for readers, especially?
Yeah. Well, it's the greatest book ever written to start.
I love it.
It started really well, though, right?
Yeah, it's true. It's true. This book had a very interesting life in that our partnership began years and years ago when Andrea and I were both asked to read a ghost story publicly, performatively, for a group at this lovely bar that was candlelit, had this wonderful atmosphere. And I was aware that Andrea had this company called Burrows of the Dead, and I thought it was really cool. And all her messaging was really respectful about both history and respectful of the dead, which is that's kind of my thing about coming into any kind of ghost story. If you're talking about real people, is that level of respect. And so after the event, I sort of sidled up to Andrea and said, "Hi, by the way, in case you need someone else for your company, I do have my tour guide's license." And little did I know it was this company that seemed like it was this massive and incredible endeavor was just, clever marketing and Andrea behind a computer. So I ended up being the first hire. And then years later, after working for Burrows of the Dead for a little while, I had an editor who approached me and said, after one of my ghost tours, who was on the tour, and said, "I really like how you are talking about ghosts and think you should totally do a book of New York City ghosts." And I said, "Well, if you like how I'm presenting all of this, I kind of owe that to my boss." So bringing Andrea into the project was a no-brainer because, again, even though we have different interests regarding the paranormal in general and slightly different belief structures, we're going to leave that to you to guess, dear readers, about who's more of the believer and who's more of the skeptic. But bringing Andrea in was obviously one of the best idea I ever had. And the original editor who had approached me about this book wasn't able to end up acquiring that book, but my editor at Kensington, who I had been working with for years, the wonderful Liz May, was able to acquire the book, which was definitely the right move. It was like I wanted to stay with Kensington and continue to have a home here with this publisher that I'd already loved working with, the Spectral City. And so it just so happened when Elizabeth and Andrea and I were talking about what this book should be, and Kensington as a company was like, "Hey, we got to expand it beyond just New York City, just to have a broader appeal." And what about what about this whole feminist ghost tour that you've got, Andrea? That seems like a really interesting way to frame this book. It just so happened to coincide with a very popular tour that she'd just been running. You want to talk about that, Andrea?
Yeah, honestly, I think that's what makes the book really unique. I mean, there's a lot of books about ghosts. There's a lot of books that analyze the relationship between ghost lore and American culture and memory. But I think to have like a feminist take on that, the marketing materials say this is the first book of its kind that does that. And I really think it is. I don't think I've had a cultural history that is feminist based. And so I had been doing this tour called Ghostly Women of Greenwich Village. People were really digging it. Everybody really loved it. And we just saw myriad connections between, and again, I want to preface, like every time I say, like the female experience or whatever, I'm not being like essentialist or totalizing. It's like, kind of broad stroke stuff. So obviously just kind of bearing that in mind. But we saw a lot of connections between, the female experience in this country, especially historically, especially from the era where a lot of ghost stories generate, i.e. the 19th century. So for example, women and death go together, in childbirth, in labor, in child rearing in olden times when infant mortality and child mortality was so prevalent, in elder care, in providing death care for our families. Back then, home funerals and caring for bodies was physically, literally in the domestic and female sphere. Now, even, elder care and end-of-life care often falls to the women in the family. And, statistically speaking, we're more likely to be widows. We're more likely to experience that, so death and our lived experience go hand in hand. And that kind of like inherent, sadly, danger of being a woman. So you have a lot of vulnerability, a lot of possibilities where you confront death face to face as a woman. Hence our interest in ghosts and true crime and even, talking about witches and witch talk and this trend that won't die, like the relationship between women and the supernatural, women in spiritualism, whether it's our witchy powers or our ability to act as fantastic mediums, supposedly. So there was so many connections and points of contact, and it all just really seemed to work beautifully together. And it was nice to have some like kind of previously unexamined stories brought to the fore.
I was going to say, I think that was one of, because there are definitely, Lizzie Borden. I've heard of her, and, so I liked, because I mentioned earlier, like Eliza Jamel that was a new person for me. I believe Ma Green was also someone I had never heard of before. So there are all these names that that's what I appreciate. I was like, you kind of know the ones like they're more well known, but you dive into these other stories and kind of also, as you said, explore outside of the area of New York and everything. And just it's such a good lens. Like I love and like diving into cultural history. Like that was one of my favorite classes in college, was like just examining like pop culture, not just pop culture, but just all culture. And I was like, oh.
Local lore was a huge fun thing for me. Like I love New York City ghosts, but I've been working with them for a decade, and it was so fun and refreshing to go outside of that and to just really delve deeply into the history of a place. It was wonderful.
Yeah. And Liz May's brilliant decision to break this book down into tropes, because what this book is not is an encyclopedia or compendium, because there are thousands of women's ghost stories around this nation. We couldn't begin to go into all of them. It just wouldn't do any of them justice.
Nor is it a guidebook region by region.
Exactly. So breaking it down by trope, and by trope we mean sort of an archetype, an overarching category by which these women we put their stories into these. We begin with death and the maiden. Why is there a romanticism about a woman who dies young? We talk about mothers and wives. We talk about bad girls and killer women. We talk about spinsters and widows, positing the question of why are we so scared of women alone? We obviously have to talk about witches, and we put that in quotes because the Salem witches were not actual witches. And we have to deal with mad women, also in quotes, because that has been a label that has been hurled at women for a very long time. So the concept of women being believed, whether it's in a paranormal, supernatural sense or in any other sense in which women have struggled to be believed. We grapple with those things. And then we also deal with frauds, fakes, and myth making, because there was historically, spiritualism was entwined with a lot of women's rights, but it was also entwined with a lot of people who were taking advantage of the grieving. So we grapple with all those things in these sections, and we we were interested in trying to find some of the stories that would support or actually completely turn on its head that sort of thesis concept. And so it was kind of fun to sort of, you know, move through our instincts. Sometimes it felt almost blindly, but hit upon something that was either a scrap of the history or a location that really struck us, or just some tidbit, whether it was the ghost lore that we heard or whether it was actually the history. And then we went to see if there was ghost lore attached. You know, these things kind of sort of had a chicken or the egg quality to them about how they came to be. And then we just tried, in some cases when we were first structuring, try not to overthink it until it actually came down to all of the extensive research of making it sure it was as historically accurate as humanly possible. History is always changing, though. So,
and there were like the process was very intuitive of how we chose the stories, at least, yeah, for me and I think for you. And there were dead ends for sure. Like I noticed there was a reader question in the chat about research, and there was absolutely dead ends where sometimes there were stories like we would have liked to have done, but you know there was just nothing there. So. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting that like sometimes there was enough in the history where even if the ghost lore was kind of sparse, at least there was enough rich history in terms of here are these things that have been written in newspapers for a very, very long time. So there's some lady lived in the early 1800s and wandered central New York for 30 years and didn't freeze to death. And there's, you know, bajillions of articles about her in these historical societies. And there's one ghost entry about her. So I was like, all right, no, that counts because she's such an interesting folk character.
I was gonna say, I couldn't remember her name. I was
Lucy Dutton.
Yes, I found her. I was reading about her and I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Like you said, she didn't freeze to death. She just wandered. And I was like, that was very fascinating. Like you said, where it's not so much the ghost story, it's just the story about the person.
And especially in a chapter about quote unquote madness. I mean, this was a legitimate case where she had a psychological break. So she did have a mental illness that came in and kind of took over. However, she didn't suffer. And what's beautiful about that is that society around her did not shun her. In fact, they just kind of let her be herself and be like, okay, she's a little weird. She, you know, dresses in rags and has flowers in her hair, but we're going to make sure she doesn't freeze to death. And the reason why she didn't freeze is because New Yorkers across central New York let her in to sleep by their firesides for 30 years. And I just think that that's incredible actual act of community love and acceptance for something that has often been demonized, which is mental illness.
So I think, I'm sorry, I was looking at the questions too.
Yeah, back and forth, yes.
Back and forth. So I have a question too, and I think maybe it was one of the reader questions I might have missed, but it was, so there's so many stories that you were able to go over. Were there any stories, as you said, I think there were some that kind of led to dead ends, but were there any that did have a continuation, but you weren't able to add into the story that you would like to share with readers?
Yeah, well, like I remember really wanting to do more about ghost brides, and I would find really beautiful bits of folklore. And then I wouldn't be able to find anything really meaty about these women or their stories. Excuse me, tour guide voice, it's the end of October. So there were a few dead ends there. Sometimes there were dead ends, like when I was researching one specific person, Dolly Pauls Messick in Pequasin, Virginia. And there was like a tangle of mixed up dead ends, but I still put her in because I was able to find like that she was real. She did exist. Even though I wasn't able to figure out exactly which one, because there were many women with the same name, I couldn't figure out which one the ghost story was about. Like we narrowed it down to 2, but you know, it felt legitimized enough and hefty enough that I could put it in. And it was a beautiful story too. And, you know, just kind of regarding this question about what your favorite part of the research was, for me, it was when I found a story that felt like fiction. You know, it was like a true story, a bit of lore, and it read like a made up story. And, you know, it read like poetry or like a fairy tale. Those were my favorite moments when I found these things and I couldn't believe they were real. And then they were, and it was beautiful. So I loved that. What did you not be able to add in, Leanna?
I loved, I was really interested in, and I just wasn't sure what section she was supposed to go into. I didn't feel like any section was quite appropriate, which is why hopefully we'll have a continuation volume, and then I can put her into I would like to put her into a section about muses, people who were the source of inspiration for several different types of things, if not artists themselves. Marion Hooper Adams, whose nickname was Clover, was a socialite in DC in the 19th century, and she was a really brilliant photographer. She was not allowed to go professional with that photography, even though she was professional grade talent, because her husband wouldn't let her. And she died by her own hand by swallowing the chemicals used to develop film. And it's a complex backstory about some of that, and it's not entirely known exactly what sort of level of state of mind she was in at that point. But here was this kind of vibrant lady who was supposedly the inspiration for Henry James' Portrait of a Lady. And then there's this tragedy, and her husband just couldn't quite deal with it. He had actually loved her quite deeply. However, he was not able to show that love either in the memorial, nor was he able to, I guess, bring himself to mention her in his autobiography, even though she'd been very instrumental in keeping the social circle he was involved in intact. So her story, there's a statue in Rock Creek Cemetery in DC that is just this sorrowful statue, and it's thought to be haunted. It's where her grave is, but it doesn't have her name on it, and it's not titled or any of these things. So she's literally been taken out of her own narrative, not even named in it. And so I want to come back to her because I'm really, really, really interested in more about that Henry James connection. So I was able to write an essay for The Feminine Macabre, which is a project that Amanda Woomer has been doing a brilliant work about, collecting a women's journal of the strange. And so I was able to go ahead and do an essay about Marion Hooper Adams, because I just was like, I couldn't quite get it into this volume, but she really, really has been literally haunting me. And that's what we would find, is that some of these stories would truly, literally be haunting us in our thoughts, outside of the writing process. And that's when we know we were really onto something.
And one story I really wanted to include, but couldn't, because we kind of had a little bit too many New York City ghost stories. Mm-hmm. There's a really amazing ghost story in Flatbush, Brooklyn, about the ghost of Melrose Hall. And I would love to include it in volume 2 if we're able to publish volume 2, because it's crazy. It's absolutely bonkers. It's about this man who locks up this woman in a secret chamber and she starves to death. And it is, I'm going to say, like 75% true. There's a ton of stuff on historical record that corroborates a lot of stuff in the legend. And so what I need is some time and space to go digging in some archives, find out the identity of this woman, if she was real, get more details, and have another book that doesn't already have like 4 or 5 New York City ghosts in it, because it was too much. But yeah, we want to include hopefully a section on women who were, quote, buried alive. And we're such Poe fans. We got to throw some premature burial in there. So
yeah, definite Fall of the House of Usher, and the idea of and there's even Cask of Amontillado in there too. It just like there's so much
walling up.
I'm excited about this potential follow up. I'm like, I need it now.
Oh yeah, no, seriously, we're ready for it.
There we go.
So that does kind of bring, like, talking about ghosts and everything. I want to know, are you guys believers? Have you had any ghost encounters?
Eyebrows waggling on Leanna there.
Yeah. So, okay. So spoiler alert. I am the true believer of this. I am the Mulder to Andrea's Scully, and the dynamic. We knew that kind of right out of the gate. And not that either of us is so. Neither one of us is like militant about our beliefs that we're not flexible and open. I believe you should be a skeptic first, because our human brains are so imaginative and over imaginative. And if you know that you're in a haunted space, your brain will concoct something. So I've had enough experiences in enough different haunted places. I am a ghost tour guide in New York City, yes. However, I've also been a ghost tour guide in Ohio and in Minneapolis, and involved in other, sort of supernatural supernatural careers. When I was an actress, most of the shows that I ended up being in had some kind of paranormal element in the shows that they were in and of themselves. So it's really followed me everywhere. And I absolutely have had experiences that I cannot explain in any other capacity. So However, I don't necessarily think I want to be leading with that. I'm not somebody who needs to go into a specific haunted space to have that belief proved to me. I'm much more interested in what's the history in this historic space. How can I honor the people who lived and died in this building? That's really, I'm not interested in necessarily being scared, and that's or trying to like create a scary experience for someone else. The stories in our book are legitimately chilling because the history is harrowing, and it's not all doom and gloom. We have some really fun and funny ones too, because we try to make sure that, you know, our stories are expressing the range of human experience, which is not all doom and gloom. And there's lots of different things to celebrate. But definitely, you know, and I can go into some specifics about some of the specific haunted experiences that I've had. You'll find lots of them in the book. But we also didn't make up stuff that didn't happen to us. So there's one particular house in New York City, the Merchant's House, which has a very lively ghost, Gertrude Treadwell, a spinster who we are both very fond of. And Andrea and I both had a physical, tactile experience in this house.
Yeah, and it was on a night where I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't like psyching myself up. I didn't like want something to happen. I was just there. I was being very matter of fact. I was observing a tour, taking notes, hoping to lead it as a volunteer. My headspace was like just completely clear. Like I wasn't, you know, trying to get something. And then I was astonished to find a very heavy kind of weird feeling descend over me, an overwhelming kind of sense of sadness as I was standing by Seabury Treadwell's portrait in the front parlor. He's the father of the house. And then I felt something sort of brush by me. I was wearing a sleeveless shirt because it was June. It was a beautiful June evening. And I was just like touched by something brushing by me. And I could feel it like moving through the space in front of me. And I was like, that is very weird. And then when I told the docents what happened, they were like, yeah, Seabury's bedroom has had a lot of active like footstep activity tonight. You know, as you were coming in for the tours, y'all were coming in for the tour, we heard footsteps in this empty room up there. So, and then a woman on my tour was like, that's the spot where I also felt something touch me, that one spot in the front parlor. So I was, you know, again, you want a little touch of skepticism because I think it makes the inexplicable moments all that sweeter, you know, contrast. And so to have these experiences validated and confirmed by other individuals who have like, they have no skin in the game. There's like, we're not trying to do anything to convert you to our belief system. Like we're not going to hit you with a petition afterwards. You know what I mean? Like there's no end game here. We're just simply telling you what happened. And to hear that affirmed by independent parties who equally have nothing to prove has been intriguing to say the least.
Yeah, I also similarly so, like I wasn't in any kind of headspace that had anything to do with haunting. It was the middle of the day. I was in the Merchant's House wandering through because I wanted to, you know, anytime I'm in the area and I have time, I will go back to that house because there's always something to hear. Hearing different docents talk about the house, you learn different things. And I just like supporting the place. So, it really struck me. I had not realized just how close we were as a city to losing this historic museum, which is basically a time capsule. You know, Gertrude Treadwell lived in this house her whole life, and she kept it, even though she lived until the 1930s. She kept it, and this is sort of an apocryphal quote, exactly as Papa would have liked it. So it's this literal time capsule from the 1870s, give or take a few years. And I blurted out when the docent said how close they were to everything being auctioned off. I just blurted out, "Thank God it was saved!" in this like overwrought emotional moment, right? And as I said that, it was like my passionate outburst of love for this house created the fondest, sweetest little like grab of my elbow. You know when like there's a fond squeeze, like it's a fond squeeze on your elbow. Like it's one of those things where it carries with it, if it's done in the manner in which it was done to me, it's just this fondness. And it was this fond squeeze on my elbow, but it was literally like 40 degrees colder than my body temperature. And I thought maybe for a second it was my friend Amanda, who has admittedly bad circulation. However, I turned and it was not, in fact, my friend with her cold hands. It was, in fact, just the settee was just there in the corner of the parlor, this particularly haunted spot. So I sort of, you know, the docent noticed that I had this look on my face. And then afterwards we were chatting and she goes, "Well, you were standing in the most haunted place in the entire house. That is like, you know, that parlor is haunted." And if you think about it too, there's kind of a beauty of that, and that's where all of the liveliness and the life of the house was happening. That is where they would entertain, and that's where they would receive visitors. like us. So there is something lovely to that. And yeah, that for the most part, my spectral experiences have been actually quite fond and sweet. The spectral experiences that are less so, I go into some detail about that, about 14 West 10th Street in the book, for sure. My unreliable narrator chapter is all about my uneasiness with a certain property, and wanting to kind of like restore Jan Bryant Bartell's memory to people. She's the reason why we know a lot of the ghost stories about that building. And she really, truly was a sort of a canary in the coal mine of that building before other even more terrible things happened in that building. So I don't want to go into all of that because we'll leave that for the book. And it's also content warning. There's definitely, we're talking about, murder sometimes. So there's, fair warning, for as fond as I am of talking about ghost stories, we're also very aware that we are dealing with some very, very deep and dark and potentially quite triggering material. So please, if anyone has any questions about that kind of thing, Andrea and I are very open to talking about this. And especially we want readers to take care. We don't want anyone to injure themselves because of our
Yeah, for sure. It's funny too, just thinking about Jan, how I was equally fascinated by the women who were like the keepers of the stories in the process of writing this book. So it was Jan in that chapter. It was Catherine Tucker Wyndham in the chapter about the Red Lady of Huntington College, the woman who wrote The Telltale Lilac Bush, Ruth Ann Musick, like just these women who collected and who kept ghost stories alive. Like, I don't know, I found them, the muses and the keepers of the flame, to be just as fascinating as the stories themselves. I don't know, I loved them for that.
I love just like a passing of stories. I think that's like, I work in, I love books. I love stories. So I think it's always so fascinating how they're shared. And like, especially like, I love like oral stories. I love that those get passed down over and over. And I find that's like, I don't know. It's like, it always just like, I have a special place in my heart. So
yeah, it's a good gift from the past, it's this beautiful gift.
We do have a reader question. They say they love that you guys are so passionate about delving into the true history of the stories. Is there a certain location or time period of history that really draws you in?
The Gilded Age. Gilded Age cities. So I'm particularly obsessed with the late 19th century in metropolitan areas, because you are getting so New York, London. I've done a lot of research in Gilded Age New York, in late Victorian London, Paris, other European cities that I feel like maybe I have a past life draw to. I'm kind of obsessed with Prague, and so that time period is really, really vital for me as a storyteller, because it's the time in which our modern era of civil and human rights was really taking the next step, because the labor movement, trying to ensure that workers could have a fair and safe place to work, while they weren't able to get any laws passed until the 20th century, the labor movement was getting its start in the 19th century. Women's rights for all, and all the complication of women's suffrage. And let's be clear, like, I'm focusing, when I'm looking at, heroes from the 19th century, I'm looking at like Ida B. Wells, who was looking at suffrage from a holistic and every woman perspective. A lot of suffrage was very exclusionary of people who were not white women. And so it's a fraught time period, but it's also a time period where so much was changing. And you have the Industrial Revolution that's giving us so much in terms of new technologies. However, health is lagging far behind in many cases. So that's why you have this interest in the pseudosciences and things like that. It was this vibrant, dynamic place, but there's still lots of injustices that are happening. However, a concept of a lot of our modern 20th century efforts towards inclusion and sort of a better, more equitable world was getting, people were talking about these things. Feminism was, the new woman was happening in the 19th century. That's not a modern thing that we're putting on to these 19th century people. They were talking about it then. So for me, that's what drives me to the ghost lore of that time period, because a lot of times it was still a very restrictive time period, and people couldn't be their true, authentic selves in many ways, whether that was depending on their racial background, depending on their orientation, their sexuality, their gender identity, things like that. And so it's complicated, but people were finding their way through. And I find that to be a really, really juicy place to be examining stories from.
That's an amazing answer.
The location is somewhat dependent. Like, I definitely have been an instinctive Victorianist like my whole life, even as a teenager. So, but I know that's a very long century. So it kind of like will fluctuate a little depending on where I am. Like if I'm in America, I'm very interested in antebellum America, 1840s, and even before, like 1820s, or even the turn of the last century, where America is just kind of finding its footing as a nation, and there's a lot of fits and starts, and things are very rough. Just kind of like it's a roughly formed clay. It hasn't been refined. So like more towards the beginning of that century. But then if I think about it, like in my heart, and if I can go over across the pond back to Europe, I'm kind of a secret closet medievalist a little bit. Like I'm super into the 14th century. And I kind of feel like part of me, maybe if we're playing the game, like the past lives game, I'm like, yeah, I'd be cool chilling in a nunnery with like Hildegard von Bingen, and I'd be like brewing my own beer, growing my own herbs, like being an insane mystic, eventually inevitable witchcraft burning. That's my fate. I'm mouthy and it would happen. So yeah, like the Middle Ages aesthetically and I don't know, all that weird religious fervor that's so bizarre.
It's definitely like it has so much like, because so much was still unknown. It's like, it just like, I love that's also a great answer. Because like,
it's like literal Gothic or like romantic Gothic revival.
Right, exactly. Yes, totally. Here's our bookends right here. But yeah, no, it's interesting because things like Hildegard being 12th century, she was so ahead of her time, and she's like, I watched a German movie called Visions. It's about her life. It's like a biopic about her life, and it's one of my favorite movies. And she was doing things like healing people with crystals and herbs. And it's like, oh, hey, look at all that witchcraft. It's just so interesting, like what's witchcraft and when and what isn't. In this case, it was like she was doing it at her abbey, at her nunnery, the one that she was running, so it's like, there's so many exciting historical figures when you start to look at history. There are women who are doing incredible things, a long time ago. And, I hold on to that when I get frustrated about things. I'm like, you know what? Folks have persevered.
Crohn's always come through. We missed a reader question about your favorite Halloween movies.
I also have that one on my questions to ask you. I promise I will get to it.
Okay, I do have your movie. I was like, Visions.
Okay, because I was going to say, we can go through some, because I do have a few more reading or like book related questions.
Yes,
so we can do some Halloween because it is Halloween. So what would be your favorite Halloween movies? Whoever would like to go first.
Well, I don't necessarily think that this solely should be a Halloween movie, because it's my favorite movie and I will watch it any time of the year. And that is Crimson Peak by Guillermo del Toro.
I need to watch that.
Because he is, Guillermo del Toro is my favorite filmmaker. And Crimson Peak is a Gothic Victorian, it's romance, like, but in a lowercase r romance. So not in the happily ever after romance. No, there's some, it's sort of a lowercase r in terms of the atmospheric and psychological horror. But it is not a jump scare movie. So, I mean, it has a couple of them, but it's not a gory movie per se. And the things that you think are happening, it's just very much of a psychological sort of Hitchcock kind of vibe to it. And it's also beautiful. And I want all of the clothes that are in the movie.
I need to watch that because I was worried it would be. I mentioned before, I think in a different chat, that I love reading horror and I like Gothic horror. I love it, but watching it is always harder for me for some reason. Like, I think it's I'm like, okay, I can close this and I will start over tomorrow at 10 a.m. when it's sunny out.
Totally. No, I think you could get by with Crimson Peak because there's a couple of jump scares that are sort of like inevitable. You know when they're coming, and it's just like, okay, and then you can just listen to the sound cues and then open your eyes again. Okay. It's totally fine. You won't miss anything if you sort of self-curate that experience. Okay. But yeah, the performances are spectacular.
Mr. Tom Hiddleston is in that.
Oh yeah.
I do love it.
Man, it's like,
oh yeah. Well, what's great about that when that movie was first coming out, my entire Facebook wall was just tagged with photos of conversations like, I love that Guillermo del Toro has gone into your mind and found out your favorite things and is now making a movie about them. And I'm like, yeah,
thank you.
Thanks.
I have like dozens of horror movies that I love, but for specifically Halloween movies, do you know that my favorite thing to watch on Halloween is not a Halloween movie at all? It is a specific segment of a movie from the 1940s called Meet Me in St. Louis, directed by Vicente Minnelli. It's when he met Judy Garland and May Minnelli. And it's the Halloween sequence in that movie where the kids are like, have you seen it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, yeah, one yes, and
I was in the show, so I had to watch the film. It was part of like the cast had to watch the film.
Of course.
I've heard the name, but I have not watched it before.
So and by the way, Tootie is like, that's my soulmate. I'm like, growing up, I was Tootie, right? Yeah. My dolls have 4 fatal diseases. So, and Tootie's like the little kid in the family. She's kind of Wednesday Addams-ish. And like the scene around Halloween, it's set in St. Louis in 1904. So this is the era before trick-or-treating. In America, when kids would go out on Halloween and they would just, I can't swear on this, can I? They would just F up, right? And so they're breaking furniture, they're starting bonfires, they're like playing pranks, they're like cross-dressing, they're amazing. And they just have this massive bonfire in the street, they're busting up furniture, and Margaret O'Brien's character, Tootie, is just chanting, I'm the most horrible, I'm the most horrible. And then they like stuff a shirt and pretend it's a dead body and throw it on the streetcar tracks. Anyway, it's amazing. And it's just like this moment in American history pre-trick-or-treating when Halloween was totally nuts for little kids. And it's beautifully done. And yeah, the whole rest of the movie is amazing too. But it's just like this I don't know. I kind of wish I could have seen, that would be a stop on my time machine. I wish I could have seen American Halloween in the era before it became what it is today. Like I like it today, but I would have been interested to see kids knocking over privies and stuff like that. Yeah. Setting a lot of fires.
I was like, I don't think I always forget. Like I know in my head it has not always been how it is now for trick-or-treating, but like I didn't realize how wild it got.
It was kind of bonkers.
Hulk's coming by just ask for Kit Kats.
Yeah, no, and like back in the day, they would just like burn your house down. I mean, there's this wonderful book that I loved as a child called Ghosts I Have Been. I'm Canadian, so I want to say Ghosts I Have Been. But anyway, Ghosts I Have Been by Richard Peck. And it's about a girl named Blossom Culp who's clairvoyant and who interacts with the spirit of a little boy who went down with the Titanic. And it opens with her playing pranks on Halloween. Anyway, it's just one of my all-time favorite kids' books, and I loved it. And I don't know, that whole thing. It's so good. So good.
I have to check out that book. It's like, I was like, I haven't read that before, but this is a little more recent, but my favorite book series growing up was the Medium series by, I just had a moment. I can't think of her name at the moment. My brain is short-circuited. I'll think of it later. I was like trying to think of her pseudonym and my brain is going to be like, oof. But I loved it. It was about this,
when you said Medium, I just thought of the TV show with Patricia Arquette, which is also great.
But my sister and I were obsessed with watching that.
I love that.
Yeah, but it was all about this girl. Like she could talk to ghosts. And I was like, I want to do that.
Yeah. That's one of those books that you read when you're young. It launches yourself in your unconscious, and it never lets you go. You know, it's just part of you for the rest of your life.
Yes,
the power of Kidlit.
Yeah, seriously. No, seriously. I mean, that we were talking about. We were showcasing our favorite on screen the other day. We were showcasing. So this is like the reason for the season, as it were, for me. Like this book, I was obsessed with this book, and I read it obsessively. So it's just all these stories. It's just it is a book of ghost stories. And this was the first chapter book I remember reading cover to cover that I remember reading and finishing and being like, oh my God, and then quoting and it, so this is, this was formative for me. And I went right from this into a collection of Edgar Allan Poe when I was like 9, which explains
too young for Poe. These were mine.
Ooh,
Yes.
I'm gonna be like
So
writing that.
good.
Like, I may reach out to you guys later to have
Oh yeah, no, seriously.
like book lists because
I want to start a kids club. Let's do it.
yeah, there is so much. Oh, but it is true. There's so many like children's books, like outside of like ghost, but just like that do stick with you, and that's like, yeah. As I said, there's a reason why I work in publishing. I love it.
Exactly. No, those things didn't, those things locked in and didn't let go. Wrinkle in Time was certainly one of those for me.
I liked A Swiftly Tilting Planet.
I loved The Secret Garden.
Oh my God, The Secret Garden.
I was obsessed. I read that every year.
A Little Princess for me.
I never read it, but I loved that movie. It was like, I think I watched the movie too many times, but I should try and read it at some point.
No, it's so good. But yeah, I mean, and I was also a musical theater kid, so of course it's like I had to read the source material for Les Mis, and I had to read the source material for Phantom of the Opera. And guess what? They're both really great books. So, and then it was very exciting to me to be like, oh, and I also like the source material too. It's actually, yeah, I wasn't sure. But yeah, no, all of that has stuck with me, but definitely it sticks with me even more if there's a spooky angle. So that's.
Alice loved Phantom of the Opera, the Universal with Monty Jr. She watched it twice. She asked to watch it again. She like obsessed over it. It was amazing.
I wonder what she'd think of the other versions. Like, I wonder what she'd think of the Claude Rains version.
I'd like to see. So anyway, we watched just a ton of Universal monster movies during the pandemic when we were all never leaving our house. And she loved Phantom of the Opera. She loved The Mummy, which was interesting. She loved it and hated Wolfman. Wolfman made her cry.
Oh.
She started sobbing and made us turn it off. And she refuses to watch Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I was just thinking that was like the next one that was in my head.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I think,
that's interesting.
Using because I like it. Yeah. But yeah, she sobbed at Wolfman. Oh my God. Yeah.
I have not seen that one. I watched the Michael J. Fox, the
Teen Wolf?
Yes, Teen Wolf. I've seen that one. That was my first thought. I was like, I know that's not what they're talking about.
I also no, but it's like, I was also that kid where if anyone was mean to the monster,
yes,
that I couldn't handle it. So like, I actually couldn't get through Frankenstein and I actually have a hard time with the ending in Phantom of the Opera. So like, it's all like, I've always been that kid who's like, no, don't hurt the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. As a kid, I was watching Hunchback of Notre Dame. I had to turn it off for like 5 minutes. I was like, they're making fun of him. Turn it off. I freaked out.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the interesting thing too, is like, we come into these spooky stories with just so much love, and we hope that it's very clear that we're all heart about this. We're all empathy for the plight of everybody that we're talking about, because we're not coming in desensitized to any of that. Actually, no, we're incredibly sensitive people. So.
And I think that's true, like a lot of goths and like horror people, like we are super empathetic. And I think that's why we have to cloak ourselves somehow in this and confront it in a way that works for us. Because we're the ones that cry when the monster gets hurt.
You can definitely, like, reading like the stories, you can tell there's so much care and consideration that goes into telling these stories, I believe.
Thank you. And as I'm here as Sarah Winchester, that was like my main goal, was to sort of like restore the actual truth of her, because even though I'm dressed like Helen Mirren from the film, that of course was complete flights of fancy. The thing that film got right about her was that she was kind and smart and fiercely intelligent and very stylish and very generous, very, 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 very generous. But in terms of all of the ways in which she was painted as this, spirit-driven madwoman, that's completely untrue. So yeah, I think that's in the same way, like, we don't necessarily want people to hurt the monsters like we're talking about. We're also very interested in making sure that, like, the truth will get out about people who have been, like, defamed. And that, Andrea and I talk a lot about, this going back to, like, both her and I being passionate about Edgar Allan Poe and his legacy. And Andrea created a whole tour to restore Poe's good name.
Yeah, because he shows up on so many ghost tours in New York City, and the nonsense they say and the silly rumors they spread and the just the way they feed into this cartoon caricature of Poe. I'm like, guys, like, the 1840s was not that long ago. Like, we can verify stuff. Like, you don't have to say things that aren't true. There's this nonsense rumor that he used to go to this Italian restaurant, and it's on Bond Street, and he used to drink there, and he was inspired by that restaurant to write the Cask of Amontillado. And I'm like, I can tell you 17 ways that story's false. Like, guys, just get off the tour. Put the truth on the tour. And do you know what the truth is? That location was a hydrotherapy clinic run by a woman who was like advocating for reproductive rights and women's health in the 1840s, handing out flyers she drew herself. Like, I'm like, this woman, Mary Gove Nichols, was amazing. Like, why are you not talking about her? Why are you making up this nonsense? Anyway, whatever.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I'm gonna need a whole. I feel like I need a whole conversation. Like, I would love to learn more about this. I'm like,
all of these are prompts for further discussions. Yes. So.
Yes. Like, I will be sending you emails more information. I'm like, I love it. So what I was gonna say, I have a ghost tour question, but I think we have another. Oh, do you have a favorite story penned by Poe from a reader? Whoever would like to go first.
Personally, the one like I come back to is one that I was really actually quite terrified by, is one of his shortest ones, and it's not as well known. It's called The Oval Portrait. And basically he just, the narrator is describing a scenario in which a young woman has been the subject of a painter's portrait, and he like paints her to death. Like, he takes her life force like out of her, and when the painting is done, she is dead. And I just found that so harrowing and so chilling, but also like there's also something so true about the power of art, and how the power of art does have a spark of life in it. And so it was just like, but I also felt like, okay, that's not the end of the story. So I, in my bold and brash ego, penned a sequel to that called Not More Lovely Than Full of Glee. And thankfully someone, liked it enough to publish it. So it's in an anthology called Winter's Tale, Horror Stories for the Yuletide, because it is set at Christmas when the painter returns to where he last left that portrait and finds that nothing is as it seems, and she is not in fact dead. But I feel like there's so much about Poe that's like so formative to me. So the minute I say, oh, this is a favorite, then I'll think, yeah, but what about this aspect of The Fall of the House of Usher? Or, so I will say The Oval Portrait, but I have about 5 favorites. So.
I remember that story. I loved it, and I loved the title. And when we first started working together, and I was like, oh, who is this person? Should we work together? And I started reading some of your stuff, and you wrote like a story about electricity.
Charged.
And I read that, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to work with this person. So the Poe question, all the greatest hits, like the obvious ones. I do love Mask of the Red Death. I do love Cask of Amontillado. I do love Murders in the Rue Morgue. I really do. But I also love William Wilson. I think William Wilson's really subtle and cool. And then a story that doesn't get talked a lot about is Tale of the Ragged Mountains, which is real atmospheric. It's kind of got a time slip element to it. That one's not talked about very much, but I find it very evocative. So yeah,
that's a good answer.
Thank you.
More Poe, I think. I'm like trying to think. There was there's the classics, but there was one, and I feel like it was a poem. I'm trying to remember, and I remember he had like a piece of her hair, and I'm trying to think of the name. It's going to come to me much later in the evening. It was like a very, like, it's been many years since I read it, but I had to do like an analysis of it, and it's just like diving into his like just him. It was very interesting. So I need to revisit that. I'm trying to think of what my brain is. I don't know.
We're all career spooky people. It is very difficult this time of year. So I was like,
it's been a while since I thought of the name, but now I'm going to have to do. I'm going to be making a long list of things I will be doing after this chat. So I have to watch all these movies. And yes. So, are there any lessons to be learned from how these women's stories have been molded over time from your book?
That's a nice question. I like that.
It's a great question. I think that asking who benefits from the ways in which the story is told. And and who suffers from the ways in which the story is told. So examining things from an intersectional point of view, where you're looking at the background of the person involved. Are they jutting up against a power structure that wants to keep her in place? Or is she a liberating figure, and the story is trying to actually amplify that sense of freedom. So I think just asking yourself questions about the way in which it is portrayed. We've tried to unpack the ways in which any given story has been told. In the case of Sarah Winchester, her painting her as this sort of mad woman who built this endless mansion behooved the narrative for the people who turned it into an amusement house, an amusement park, an attraction. So that was it behooved them to tell stories about her that have no basis in history, because it fit the narrative of the mystery house that they were creating. So now the Winchester Mystery House has this difficult position that they're in of having to sort of say, okay, well, legend has said this because people expect to hear it. But the reality is more like this. And it's been lovely to see that the docents there, the tour guides and the house historian, love talking about her real history, and that feels a bit like justice. So I think in that, with like asking who benefits from the way in which a story is told, I think you'll find at least part of the answer there. But again, as society changes, so do we, and so do the stories we tell.
Such a perfect answer. I have almost nothing to add to that, except that the truth will come out eventually. It may take a while, but eventually I do feel things will come to light. So watch out, murderers of the future, we will find.
Except we're not going to figure out about Lizzie Borden.
That one will like forever stay with me. I'm like,
well, and I was so glad that I knew that Andrea was fascinated by Lizzie Borden, because like I knew it would be expected of us to write about, and I had no interest whatsoever in writing. I'm interested in reading about something that someone else writes, but I was like, I don't have any way in here. So I was so glad, and it's a magnificent chapter, by the way.
Such an enigma. Oh my God. Yeah, I will never know. I've thought about it.
It's both frustrating and just fascinating.
Yeah.
Just to know. Yeah.
I have like stared at her portrait and looked into her eyes, and I'm like, tell me, Lizzie. And I'm like, nope. She's just locked box.
She's like, no one's known.
Oh God. Yeah, I know.
So if you could have a chat, then I guess you could kind of say maybe it'd be Lizzie. If you could chat with any of the people featured in your book, who would you choose? Would it be Lizzie?
Oh, hell yeah. I'd just be like, listen, girl, we need to talk. I want to talk to Lizzie. I want to talk to Betsy Bell, the Bell Witch. I want to talk to, God, who else? Leanna, who would you want to talk to?
Well, I want to talk to Sarah Winchester.
I want to
I want to talk to Sarah Winchester, and I want to dance the Virginia Reel with Ma Green. So I want to sit with Ma, and we can't drink with Ma because Ma was against alcohol. But Mary Becker Green was the first woman to obtain a steamboat pilot's license in 1892, and she still captains the ship that she haunts in the afterworld, the Delta Queen. And there's so many great stories about her. She was such a spitfire of a person, and so I just want to hang out with her, and I want to hang out with Sarah Winchester.
I would also invite Gertrude Treadwell and Eliza Jamel to that dinner party.
Oh yeah,
and then obviously Joan Rivers, no brainer. She's VIP on that.
Having actually met her, she is every bit the force of nature that anyone can hope for.
So jealous, so jealous.
She went off on a tear. I was working at a television studio, and she was in for a media tour, and she went off on this correct tear about how Coco Chanel is a Nazi. She was. but Joan just like took an interview and just went on an educational tangent, letting the people of America know that Coco Chanel was a Nazi. So
that's
our
our
daughter trying to rein her in, and it was like not happening. But she was a Nazi though.
Oh, Joan, I love her. Yeah, I would have her over for dinner in a heartbeat.
those answers. Okay, that's good. And then, so I'm curious, what is something you want readers to take from after finishing reading all of the stories? What would you hope to like take?
God,
I would want people to lovingly care for their own stories and their own families. Actually, in some ways, I would like for people to look at their own ways in which their own stories are being told to themselves and others. And maybe if some of your own mythologizing about yourself isn't kind to yourself, maybe revise that, maybe revisit that. Think about what would you want a historian to know about you, and maybe live into that truth.
Yeah. I was going to say something similar, like kind of, be gentle with the ghosts. I would want to take away from this book that maybe ghosts aren't here for our constant entertainment, that they're part of a continuum, and we are on that continuum as well. And just be gentle with them, and tip your tour guide, people. Tip your tour guide. That's what I want them to take away from this.
It's so true. It's so true.
Please.
And then, so this is kind of a similar question from our reader. I love both of those answers too, because like it is, like you said, it's like the stories, like I don't even think about it, because in my head I'm like, these are people from history, but like looking at the stories, like that is probably one of my greatest regrets, is not asking some of the people who are no longer with me about their lives. I wish I could. That's one of the things, like to write it down. I'm like, I know I did all of the like classes, like the lessons and stuff where you'd have to do the family tree and everything, but I didn't really pay attention. And I'm like, now I wish I had, because I think there's so many stories that like I would like to know now.
And every life is important. I'd like them to take that. Every life is important. History is all of us little people, our private secret lives and worlds, each one mattering.
So a reader would like to know, I know we talked about the ghosts from the book, but they would like to know, if you could have dinner with one figure from history, who would it be?
I want to sit down with Edgar Allan Poe, set the record straight on a couple things. I have some questions.
Yeah, I mean, my knee-jerk reaction is Poe, because of a similar, like he's so important to me as a writer. But then again, so are the Bronte sisters. So I'm like, when it comes to like, I in some ways I feel like I can't choose writers, because then I would be like, no, but I also want to know what this other writer feels, and would think. But I actually would like to tell Clara Walcott Driscoll that people know her name, and they know that she designed all of Louis Comfort Tiffany's stained glass lamps. I want to like give her back that truth. She didn't live to see herself credited on any of these really incredible lamps. And I know it's like this little piece of art history, but I do a one-woman show as Clara Driscoll, talking about her desire to put her name on her art through the course of her career. And her career is kind of similar to mine in that, she was born in Ohio. She wanted to move to the big city and pursue a career in the arts, very similar to mine. Her letters back home, the way that she uses phrases, the way that she writes, her cadence is very similar to mine. It's almost eerie. So this is sort of like, this is a replica. The dragonfly lamp here is kind of a replica of one of the dragonfly lamps that she designed. So she was this brilliant designer that has, her stuff now is, worth millions and millions and millions of dollars in museums all around. And they're finally, but it took until like 2007 after this, she was working on this stuff in 1888, and it took until about 2007 that museums were starting to like actually credit her with the designs. And we only know that because people found her letters, because family members kept them. And eventually they got into, the rotation of the Historical Society. So I think that's just me wanting people to know that their work is loved, and know that they are now remembered. That for me would be like a big piece, where it would be symbolic of something greater, but it's just to be able to tell her, we know your name now.
I think that's it. Yeah. It's not the same. And I don't watch the show very often, but it made me think of, there's that, I think on Doctor Who, there's that moment where I believe it's Van Gogh, and he
it's very much That episode makes me weep.
I need to watch the show, but I do. That's what I remember here, and that's what I was thinking is like, because he is someone who I think it'd be nice, yeah, like you said, to share that with people who they didn't know.
Exactly. That would feel like justice. In that regard, for sure.
Here you go. It's like you meant a lot to a lot of people.
That would be so lovely. I can think of so many artists throughout history who could use a little visit like that, you know? Just be told, hey, 100 years from now, people are going to love you.
I think mine would be, was my favorite. I am a Jane Austen person. So, and I was like, I saw her, I went to her house. I was like, that was like the one thing when I went to, I was like, we have to go here. I was like, I have to see. So I think she's because like, I think she probably, I don't know a lot about her history. So I don't know how much she knew but like, I mean, 2000, I mean, I do love the Colin Firth one, but the 2005 hand clinch, Pride and Prejudice, like everyone loves Mr. Darcy. So it's like I don't know. It's not the same as Van Gogh, but.
No, I do think she probably could have, I mean, she could probably use the reassurance that like she is a still beloved figure in terms of like that she is still read, because she didn't really get the acclaim in her life that I feel she was due. Same thing with Poe, same thing with a lot of people, and in their time were not necessarily as well regarded as now. So
yeah, everyone who struggled or everyone who was broke would just be like, hey, you're a hero to us.
Yeah. Like you mean something to so many readers
like, we love you, man.
I know. Now I want to go back in time and just like
gift on people.
Yeah, it's like, that's what I would do. It has been such a pleasure chatting with both of you. I have so many more questions. I could honestly keep going, but I will let you guys have your evening. But thank you, readers, for your questions. Thank you both for joining me today. Happy Halloween to everybody. And I hope everyone has a great rest of their evening.
If anybody has something that they didn't have a chance to ask and want to ask, I'm on social media. I will be checking it. So you're welcome to ask me questions. I'm on Twitter most often. I'm also on Instagram most often. So you're welcome to find me there and ask any questions that are also on my website, LeannaReneeHieber.com. I have a contact form there because we do love, we hope that this book can be a conversation for people. And we're happy to hear what you think.
And we're pretty accessible. Like if you have a ghost story and you want to share it, tweet at us, email us. I love it. And if you're like, oh man, I'm just getting to know these awesome women and Halloween is over, I would like to point out one more time that I'm a huge fan of the Christmas Ghost. And Burrows of the Dead does Christmas Ghost tours up until the end of December. I think December 17th is our last tour. And then we're doing an event at Flying Fox in Ridgewood, Queens on the 18th of December. So please, let the ghosts go through Yuletide, my friends. There's more still to come. It is not over. The season of darkness is just beginning.
I
need to be checking out the Christmas one. I need to do.
Yeah, dead.com, my friend.
All right. Well, thank you guys. And everyone have a great Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Bye.